show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And first of all, let me say happy 4th of July to everyone out there. I hope today is amazing as we celebrate not just what America is today, but what America was when we declared independence back in 1776 on that 4th of July, and what the mission was of the founding fathers when they established this country and they established independence from England. But what it's become today is not necessarily what they planned it to be. But you know what? That's the way things go over time. If you don't fight to keep what you have, you're going to lose it. So that's what we're going to continue to do here, is fight to keep what we have. Because we have seen, especially with this case, that if we don't fight to keep what we have, if we don't use those freedoms that were established in the Constitution of the United States, what those founding fathers had in mind, they put certain freedoms in there so that we could keep our freedoms. One of those was freedom of speech. And that's the freedom to say our opinions on any subject that we choose to say them on. And sometimes it takes freedom of speech to keep things right. The other freedom that we were given was freedom of the press. And why are those two freedoms so important? Well, number one, because with freedom of speech and freedom of the press, when you see things that aren't right, you have the ability in this country to point them out. And the more we point out the wrongs that we see, the better chance we have to keep the freedoms that we have. So that being said, I want to again wish everybody a wonderful 4th of July. Please be safe out there, but please have a very enjoyable day as we celebrate the independence of our country when it all started. This is a big one. Right? I believe it's 250 years. So this is a milestone for the greatest country on earth. But what we're talking about today is the Idaho 4 case. And you know, it's funny. All the things that have happened here in the last few days, I think were designed to make everybody go a little bit insane. You know, I did day one, lost my mind completely and forgot everything that I knew. And I think it was meant to do that. As we've pointed out, there has been absolutely a designed effort for this stuff to happen at this specific time. And what it's done is it's changed the conversation around this case tremendously. If you think about it, every talking head that could possibly be out talking about this case right now is out there talking about it. And in doing so, it's like there's some type of mass hysteria going on around the facts of the case. People are actually happy that those roommates don't have to get on the stand and tell us the truth. People are actually happy that there's a chance we'll never know the truth in this case. Well, when we see Bryan Kohberger say yes to all those charges, yet that would inevitably be a result of a plea deal. They would have never done a plea deal where Bryan Kohberger, because all plea deals, they say the same thing, whether you're, getting convicted of, shoplifting. I mean, that's the same format for every plea deal is, did you do it? All right. And nobody's threatened you. I mean, they say that on every single one. This one's not any different. So everybody that's ever taken a plea deal that was innocent has been forced to make those same statements that Bryan Kohberger did, I assure you. So, and the fact that they didn't ask for any other statements should tell you everything that you need to know. Do you think the state really wouldn't ask, where is the knife? Do you think the state really wouldn't ask, give us some type of information that we don't already know that you need to admit to? No, all they did was say, yes, yes, yes. And then you look at the expressions on Ann Taylor's face, right? You can tell that she is disgusted, but she's trying to smile and help Bryan get through this situation. And then you look at Massoff. Massoff is sitting there. I've never seen her not sitting there with a smile on her face. She certainly didn't have a smile on her face during that because she knows that it's not right. They all do. But it was predetermined. And why? I gave you a clear determination why this happened in video yesterday and when this actually happened. And I've watched so many people look at that document that clearly says June 1st, and there's a line through it and change to July, and every single one of them, including attorneys, look at that and they don't even see it. It's like they're blind-eyed to that part. That one attorney, he's so obtuse, I hope nobody ever hires him to, because they actually want something good to happen to their case, but I'm not even going to mention who he is. I mean, he was discussing how poor Bryan's signature was. And I guess they don't realize that, they quit teaching kids how to write their signature a long time ago, which is weird because when I first looked at it, I thought the same thing. Is this a fake signature? Because it looks like somebody that's never, spelled their name out before. But they quit teaching kids how to write their signature. But it didn't say one thing about the June 1st with a line through it changed to July. Good grief. But it's like in the beginning of this video, when you ask, why would Bryan Kohberger take this plea deal? I gave you all the reasons around it in yesterday's video with Josh Hurwitz. But that, I assure you, wasn't enough. That was just laying the framework to give Bryan Kohberger a carrot. But it's like when you chop down a big tree. You have to keep on chopping and keep on chopping to get somebody to agree to something. Well, we've seen all the chops on that tree here over the last year as motion after motion was rejected by this judge. And we've gone through the documents, we've gone through the arguments, and we know what should have been, approved by the judge and what shouldn't have. And it was an atrocity looking at all the motions that the judge shot down. Those were all just chops. Axe chops on that tree against Kohberger to get him to do what he did. Then they offer him the deal with the psychological evaluation. You can bet he's not going to be in general population in that prison. And everybody needs to keep an eye on it because you'll see where he ends up. And then you'll hear outrage by the community, but we've already called it out. But that still wouldn't have been enough. What was finally enough, you can bet, was pressure put on Bryan Kohberger by the state of Idaho that we never got to see or hear. That's why when I refer to Howard Bloom, sometimes I want to choke him, but sometimes I listen like he's E.F. Hutton because he does have some sources that are close to the Kohberger family that tells him things. And I believe the final thing that pushed Kohberger over the edge to get him to accept that plea deal was something that I've listened to these morons out there say that makes absolutely no sense psychologically, and they can't wrap their minds around it because they're too brainwashed, I guess. But I'm going to tell you what caused Bryan Kohberger finally, that last axe in that tree to make that tree tump over, what finally made him take the deal. Because you can bet that they were planning on, and they would have found this out with the exhibit list before June 1st, they were planning on bringing Bryan Kohberger's his family in to testify. And I'm sure they had already let them know that they were going to explore an area of questioning that they could have maybe used to actually arrest Bryan Kohberger's mother and father while they had them in Idaho against their will, forcing them to testify. And I'm sure they let Kohberger know that. And let's listen to what Howard Bloom has to say about that, because I believe that was the final axe chop in that tree to get that tree to fall over.
They had in his reversal, because all along the word had been he's not taking a plea. He wants to go to trial.
What I discovered in the course of my reporting, that early on, Ann Taylor had a sense that this is a case that she would like to get a plea deal. She approached Kohberger and discussed it with him. This was before there was the alternate perpetrator ruling that was ruled out. And he said no, because his mother was insisting that she did not want her son to admit to guilt to these crimes. Maybe she didn't believe he was guilty or whatever. Then it seems, and this is what I've been told, this is what has been suggested to me, that it's a matter of record that after the murders, on 6 a.m., he called for an hour at the parents' home in Pennsylvania at 6 a.m. He spoke with his mother, not his father. It was suggested that the state was now going to call the mother to the stand and want to find out what was said during that phone call. That caused Kohberger, as it was reported to me, a great deal of distress. He did not want this to become public. He also did not want, it was brought up to him, that his father would have to testify perhaps on the stand about what was said during their cross-country trip that I write about in great detail in my book and in the airmail articles. He wanted that to be kept secret too. So part of the reason I've been told that he finally agreed to tell his team, try to see if we can get a plea deal, was that he wanted to keep his parents from testifying. He didn't want them to be put in a situation that might leave them in some sort of jeopardy, might impugn their reputations in the community. He was trying to protect them. That led him
that's
to make
interesting.
this deal.
Now, I believe that could have had a huge impact, being the final axe blow, chopping down that tree on Bryan Kohberger. But let's be real. Let's take off the sugar coating in this situation. And let's think about what type of real pressure Bryan Kohberger would have been under as it relates to his parents, because they're trying to force a plea deal out of Bryan Kohberger. That's very obvious with everything around it. Here, we'll give you this. We'll make sure you don't go into the general pop. You're going to, if you go to trial, we're going to do everything we can to put you in a horrible situation. Think about old Creech over there in the Idaho State Prison. You know, he's been on death row now for 40 years. You know, they've tried to execute him and couldn't. You know, they're in the worst conditions and solitary confinement. But you can go to a place where you won't be in those conditions. We'll have you as a special mental evaluation case, and you won't have to do that. Now, look, every motion that you file in this case, the judge is shot down. They're not going to let you have a fair trial. When you get to trial, the judge will overrule every objection. We're going to put you in this. But then the final axe blow to that tree, imagine this. Look, we're going to bring your family in, your mother and your father. We're going to put them on the stand, and it doesn't matter what they say. We'll figure out a way to come up with charges against them. Now, how would you like your mother and your father to be sitting in a jail cell because you won't take this deal? You see, that's the type of pressure they would have been putting on Kohberger. And according to Howard Bloom's reporting there, that's the kind of pressure that actually pushed him over the edge to say, okay, I'll take the deal. Now, here's what is absolutely egregious. And you can see by the look on Megyn Kelly's face as she's trying to get her mind around this, because it can't be, you can't get your mind around it. You can't explain it away, Megyn and Howard or anybody else. You can't explain it away because two things can't be true. I think y'all would agree with that. Two things that are completely opposite of each other cannot be true. Watch the look on her face as she tries to get her mind around this particular thing.
What you just said, because I struggled with this yesterday, asking how can a sociopath who takes the lives so easily of four innocents then have empathy for his parents? Like, well, gee, I don't want that. But maybe it's not empathy. It's that I don't want them to be in the position of like going to jail. I'm human being enough to say I don't want them becoming like the parents of that guy down in Florida, Brian Landry, who killed Gabby Petito. And it was very clear the parents knew what their son had done. They denied it, but they've become the scourges of the nation because it was very clear that they let Gabby Petito's parents suffer while they knew their son had done something terrible.
Did you see the confusion on her face as she made that statement? How is it if Bryan Kohberger is a sociopath and he has no empathy for anybody, why would he have empathy for his parents in this situation? And maybe it's because he's I guess maybe he's just human enough. Well, sorry, but two things can't be true. If Bryan Kohberger is truly a sociopath, psychopath with no empathy, you cannot have empathy but then be human enough, right? You can't not have no empathy but then be human enough to have empathy. Two things can't be true. So you can't say that Bryan Kohberger is a sociopath with no empathy for anybody. All he does is manipulate everything around him to his advantage, but then say he's human enough to take this deal to protect his family members from embarrassment. You got to be kidding me. And that's why that confused look on her face will keep her confused, because you can't have two things that are true at the same time. You either don't have empathy or you do. So what is more likely? What is closer to reality there, Megan? How about the fact that they forced Bryan Kohberger into this situation, using his parents as the final axe chop on the tree to get him to take this deal, and they were probably going to use a lot more than just pressure from the country on looking bad. No, they were probably telling him, we're going to put their butts in jail. And that made him make the final decision. And as you heard them say, or you heard Howard Bloom say, and this came back before they ever filed the alternative perpetrator proffer, is when he got this information. So this all happened a long time ago. And Steve G knows it happened a long time ago as well. And I believe Megyn Kelly pointed that out, even though she may not have wanted to.
It's some information.
Motions.
Yeah, but you had information yesterday that you sent me. I read it to the audience. Speculation about what may have led him to plead regarding his parents. And let me just give you this bit of information from the courtroom about Kohberger's parents, and then you can fill things in, Howard. Brian Enton of News Nation's reporting as follows. Bryan Kohberger's parents are not crying, but they look sad, unlike their son, who looks stone cold. He admitted it all. I'm sitting behind his parents. So the parents were there today, maybe not his sisters from the sound of it, I'm not sure, but his parents were there. And that leads me back to Steve Gonsalves, because outside the courthouse this morning, he had a couple of odd comments. I mean, odd in that I didn't fully understand them, about asking the news media to go check out when Bryan Kohberger's father bought his plane tickets to come out. Do we have that soundbite, you guys? We can play it. Stand by. Here it is.
Do you have any message for Kohberger's family?
Yeah, what do you want Kohberger to do?
We know when you flew out here. We know. We have your flight records.
How are you preparing to see him today?
I'm not going to see him.
When you say you know the flight records, what do you mean, Steve?
I know when his parents booked their flight. When his father did.
What does that mean?
You'll find out.
You see right there, now I know so much. Because when you go all the way back to after that pretrial conference where they were supposed to have the alternative perpetrator evidence actually litigated, and they didn't, but instead some of the things that were said in that pretrial conference was the judge asking both sides, has any plea deals been discussed in this case? I mean, he brought it up in that conference. And then after that conference, I got this wrong. They brought the family members in for a secret hearing that was role of victims. Okay, so now as you hear like Steve G talk about how they, got to say their say on things, but they were never really told what was really going to happen. In your mind, you think this just happened. No, when he says the family members got to say their say on things, that was way back in that secret hearing on role of victims. I thought they were bringing them in and reprimanding them for breaking the non-dissemination order, and now it couldn't have been more wrong. That is when this deal went down. They brought them in as their role of victims to let them make their final statements on this plea deal. That was way back in May. this thing happened in May, and they're trying to make it look like everything since then was real, and it wasn't. None of it was real. It was smoke and mirrors. And the second this thing comes out, guess what we get? A pre-recorded, the next day, I'd watched it yesterday, a pre-recorded Peacock special on the Idaho 4 case. And then we've got, on July 1st, Howard Bloom's new foreword to his book was released. Then we've got the Patterson book coming out. We got the Prime series coming out. And everybody is dumbfounded about all of this. I don't know why, but you can see by the looks on their face, they're just having a tough time, grasping things, getting their mind around things. Well, you shouldn't. If you just look at the history of this thing and what really went down, it should tell you everything you need to know. And then you won't be as confused anymore, mainstream morons. But that all leads me back to this, because I watched a animation yesterday. It's all over, YouTube. It's this new animation by this young lady. It was an excellent animation. I'll give her that. Of course, many of the facts in the little recreation are incorrect, and she's the one that did the animation for the Dateline series. And as I watched the little animation with all the facts that she disclosed in it, and I see the ones that are wrong, and I see the ones that are glaringly obvious, and then I go into the comment section and I read a comment from somebody that I couldn't have said better myself. And I know we've all made the same comment, but when you look at the animation and you look at where Dylan's room is, right underneath Maddie and Kaylee's room, right underneath it, anybody with a brain should be able to make the comment that this person made. But when we look at this animation and you see where Dylan's room is and what's separating her from Maddie and Kaylee's room, and you think about the noise that she would have heard, and then you can't come up with this comment, then that means you are literally brainwashed, and that's why we won't let this thing end like this, like they want it to. And the other thing I want to point out is where everybody is also just so confused. Like, I'm not even going to play the clip, but Matt there, he was so confused because in Bill Thompson's summation of the facts of the case, he made a statement. He said, "Let me be clear. There was never any sexual innuendos, attempts, or anything. There's nothing to do with a sexual nothing in this." And they were like, how could he even know that? This has got to have some kind of sexual. If you listen to the words of Bill Thompson in that, when he makes that statement definitively, when you listen to the words of Bill Thompson in hearings long ago, where he berated the defense expert on change of venue because he suggested stalking, and Bill Thompson says, this was not stalking. You knew there was no stalking. Then you have to take a step back and use your brains. The reason they did not want this case to go to trial is because they would have finally had to explain the real circumstances around this case. You see, everybody talks about Ted Bundy and all that serial unaliver crap. If you listen to the words of Bill Thompson, though, whenever he's talking about this case, none of that ever comes into play. The words that he says always go in opposite direction of that. And then people in the media are, what? I don't understand. That can't be. Open your minds, people. The prosecution, the state of Idaho, has never claimed this crime or any aspect of this crime to be any type of serial unaliving crime. What did they avoid by going to trial is making the true statements of what they truly believe this crime to be. And when you take out aspects of stalking, when you take out a connection between Kohberger and the victims, and when you take out any innuendo of any sexual anything, well, then what does that leave you with? The mainstream morons came up with the one-off Ted Bundy crap. The state of Idaho never did. Think about it. Targeted attack, no sexual innuendos, no stalking. They knew it was a hit. They were going to have to go to trial and admit to it being a hit. That's why they've been trying to make this thing go away the entire time. And don't ever put the words in the state's mouth that this was a hit, because they knew, that this was a one-off Ted Bundy, because they knew it wasn't. That was all mainstream moron narrative crap, incel crap. They knew what this thing was about, and they were going to have to admit it in trial, and that's why they did not want to go to trial, because it would have let the cat out of the bag. And we'll be able to determine that once we get all of the information that we've never been able to see. And we will not let this slide. We will not let the public go to sleep thinking, well, they saved the town with the one-off Ted Bundy. BS. It will be exposed, and it will be exposed by old Pob if the Lord willing. But back to what I was saying about that little video that's going out there with the really amazing animation. Let's look at this one part of this video, let you look at this one thing, and then I'm going to read this comment that was on this video, and I couldn't have said it better myself.
We can see Dylan's room directly under Maddie's room.
Continue across the living room onto the other side of the home.
We see Xana's room. She's sitting in bed.
Now that you look at that animation and you see Dylan right underneath Kaylee and Maddie's room, I want to just highlight this person's comment, because it's people like everybody that follows me and people like this that point out reality that's going to keep the truth out there and allow us to reveal it to the world. Especially since she heard enough commotion going on upstairs and from Xana's room to make her open her door. If the neighbor's camera audio 50 feet from the house picked up Xana screaming and then a thud as she hit the floor, Dylan must have heard the same from a closer distance and inside the house. After hearing something obviously sketchy and apparently hearing Kohberger say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," from Xana's room, and then there's someone here from upstairs prior to that, why would she walk by and see Xana on the floor and not even see if she was okay? Assuming that she was passed out makes no sense, because she just heard enough commotion coming from her room and likely the screaming and thud to know that she was literally just awake minutes before. I realize it was dark, but there was so much blood in Xana's room that it was dripping down the foundation outside the house. Even if she thought she was passed out, you're going to leave your friend on the floor, not even shout out to her, and as she sees her when she's going downstairs, "Xana, are you okay?" Plus, she went down to Bethany's room, so it's not like she was all alone and for some reason couldn't think for herself to call 911 or check on her roommates between the two of them. It's ridiculous that they just did nothing for nearly 8 hours. She must have told Bethany she saw Xana lying on the floor after hearing and seeing enough to make her scared enough to go downstairs. Yet they both did nothing except being on their phones for hours afterwards. That's the kind of common sense questions that should keep the common sense in this thing as long as we need it to. Let me tell you, folks, I am really kind of fired up on this 4th of July, because I can see what is going to give us the end to make the truth finally come out in this case. And it is the frustration of the mainstream morons because they didn't get their trial to cover. Sit back and think for a minute. They've been complicit this whole time, spinning these narratives, trying to keep this thing a certain way. In the end, they thought they were going to get the trial of the last half century to be able to cover as, reward for all of their mainstream moron nonsense. But that just got taken away from them. And you can see the reaction from a lot of them is not, well, this is finally, we can put this to bed and all this. No, the reaction from a lot of them is, this doesn't make any sense. Prosecutor, they're mad about it. And don't ever mistake mad mainstream morons losing 3 or 4 months of everyday coverage in this high profile case as not reasons to be a little bit upset and want to get back at those people that took that away from them. So when the truth starts to come out, when they release this gag order and we start pointing these things out, maybe they'll finally keep an open eye and a undeaf ear to the truth when it finally comes out, and maybe they'll report it the right way due to the fact that they're mad that they lost their trial coverage. And I can see it happening right now. I think the tactics of the state to try to hide this stuff, the tactics of the university to try to hide this stuff, the tactics of the feds to try to hide this stuff is actually going to work against them in the end, and we're going to use it to our advantage. Hope everybody has a wonderful and blessed 4th of July from Pav and family and friends. And please like and subscribe to this channel because we're just getting started. Please post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. And until next time, Pavarotti's out.
Oh,